Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the Mining Podcast. And today's guest is Alan Carter, who's the president and CEO of Cabral Gold, a mineral exploration company with a focus on gold and copper assets with a key project in Cuiu Cuiu. I hope I pronounced that properly, which is located in northern Brazil. Alan is a geologist by background and has spent a lot of time in South America. So I'm keen to get his understanding of the gold market as well as operating in Brazil. So I'd like to welcome Alan. How you doing, Alan?
Very well, Rob. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much for agreeing to do the podcast. Just wondering if you can just give us a brief background of yourself from when you graduated back in the day to where you are today, and then I've got a number of questions that I want to cover with you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I grew up in the UK. I have a degree in geology and I have a PhD in gold geochemistry and structural geology. I spent a couple of years working in Zimbabwe in a deep underground mine, and then went to work with Rio Tinto and Billiton in South America. So I lived in several countries in South America for 10 years, and I ended up working with BHP in the business development unit of BHP in Vancouver. And in 2004, I resigned from that, and I've been working with junior companies ever since.
Okay. And how do you find, obviously you've been out in South America for a while, and obviously you're operating in Brazil. Is there any particular countries that you prefer working in within mining across South America?
Yeah, there are, Rob. I mean, there are certainly, from a jurisdictional point of view, some countries which have more attractive legislation, and we're really at the earlier stages of the whole mining process, and that's exploration and development. And so, I've lived in Bolivia twice, Peru, Argentina, Ecuador, spent a lot of time in Chile, and an awful lot of time in Brazil. So I'm fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. So, obviously, some of the more well-known jurisdictions won't come as any surprise to you. That I think are particularly attractive in South America would be Peru, Chile. I'd probably put Colombia on there too, and obviously Brazil. I've spent an awful lot of my career looking for gold deposits in Brazil.
Yeah. And is there a lot of differences in terms of culture among those countries, would you say? And I suppose the way you do mining?
Yeah, they're very different. I mean, obviously, you've got the language issue with Brazil. The geology of these countries is very, very different. The climate's very different. There are obviously some similarity. It is nice to be able to travel throughout the region and be able to speak, just a couple of languages, unlike Europe, where, there's lots of different languages in Europe. But yeah, there certainly are some differences. But it's an incredible continent with an enormous potential, and it has some of the largest, mines and in countries which produce an awful lot of things like gold and copper and iron ore, aluminum. So it's an amazing continent.
And I suppose pretty I wouldn't say undeveloped as countries go, but I suppose there's a lot of potential across the continent with vast reserves in certain countries.
Yeah. No, it's enormous. I mean, you take a country like Brazil, we're working in a region that experienced the world's largest ever gold rush. Now, I'm sure all your listeners have heard of the California gold rush that happened around about 160, 170 years ago now. The gold rush that happened in Brazil in the mid-1980s was 10 times larger than the California gold rush. And most people have never even heard of it. Right. And so, there is absolutely enormous potential, and that's just one example. But there are a number of other parts of the continent which I think are highly prospective.
Yeah. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, obviously, Cabral Gold and obviously the project that you're working on, Cuiu Cuiu, and what's, I suppose, unique about the project.
Yeah, Rob. Well, let's start with Cabral first of all.
Yeah.
Cabral is a publicly listed company on the TSX Venture Exchange, so we're Canadian based. We're a very small company. We have a market cap of about 15 million Canadian dollars, so about 10 million pounds. We have a gold project in northern Brazil that so far has resources drilled off of about 1 million ounces. The gold deposit that we have, we think has the potential to be much, much larger. And the reason we say that, or I say that, is because during that gold rush that I just mentioned, there were informal miners that were washing gold from 100 different streams in 100 different places in the region, quite a large region, probably 300 or 400 kilometers across. And the project Cuiu Cuiu that you mentioned was the richest area. So it produced more gold than any of the other 100 areas. So it's quite special. The potential's enormous. We've got 8 targets outside the 1 million ounce resources, which by the way are open at depth. There's 8 other areas within 4 or 5 kilometers where we've got very good drill intercepts that we need to do more drilling. And I think several of those 8 targets will ultimately prove to be deposits. So, and we've been making some new discoveries on the project. We've been finding some new areas where we've got very high-grade boulders on surface. There's one area in particular called Alonso, where the surface boulders are averaging over 3 ounces gold, so about 90 grams. So there's an awful lot of gold come out of the area. It's very, very special. We've already got a 1 million ounce resource to start with, which is a pretty good starting base. And the potential here is to actually grow this resource to potentially 5 to 10 million ounces. So it's quite a special sort of project.
Yeah. And wonder if you can give us an overview of operating in Brazil, and why you think it is a good place to do business and do mining.
Yeah, I mean, I think first thing I'd say, Rob, about Brazil is it's a very large country. It's enormous. It's got a population of about 212 million people. It is a very large producer of commodities. It's the world's largest beef producer. It's the world's largest producer of things like orange juice. It's one of the top producers of things like soybean. And the reason it's such a major agricultural producer is because practically all of the surface area of Brazil is potentially has potential to be cultivated. Yeah. There are many parts of Brazil, most parts of Brazil, crops will grow 12 months of the year, which is pretty unusual if you live in a place like I do, like Canada or where you do, in the UK. But the other thing I'd say specifically about the mining business is it has the world's largest iron ore mining complex in the Carajás. So it's a major producer of iron ore. It has some very large aluminum mines, which produce aluminum. And for 200 years during the 18th and 19th centuries, it was actually the world's largest gold producer. And then there were obviously discoveries made in South Africa and Australia and the US. But the geology here is very permissive for a whole series of different commodities, including copper. There are some very large copper mines in Brazil. Gold, obviously. There are some very large gold mining companies that some of your listeners will be familiar. Kinross's largest gold mine is in Brazil, produces over 600,000 ounces a year. Anglo Gold Ashanti, one of the world's largest gold mining companies, which is headquartered where you are in London, has 3 mines in Brazil. Yamana, another very large gold mining company, has a big mine in Brazil. And I could go on, London Mining. There's a company called Equinox Gold you may be familiar with. That's and Chairman's Ross Beatty. They have 4 mines in Brazil. So there's a lot of activity happening in Brazil. Now, obviously, Brazil's being hit quite hard by the coronavirus right now, which is unfortunate. That will pass, and we are starting to see infection rates drop. So there is certainly some short-term challenges. But I've been working there a long time. I have family in Brazil, and I'm tremendously excited about the potential.
Yeah. Obviously mentioned about the coronavirus. Has a lot of operations stopped? I mean, that's what I've sort of been, I suppose, hearing, that operations have stopped. And if I look at, say, operations in Africa, they seem to be continuing.
Yeah.
I mean, is that the case? Have a lot of operations stopped across South
No.
America? Okay.
In Brazil, mining is regarded as a critical industry,
Yeah.
as is mineral exploration, actually. And so most mines have continued on through this. There's obviously most operations, I think all operations have put in precautionary measures, and there have been cases, obviously. But no, most mines have continued to operate. I wouldn't say completely as normal, but and it's obviously having some impact because in certain mines there are workers that have contracted the disease, and that obviously impacts productivity. But no, most operations have continued during this the pandemic.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Tapajos, is that how I pronounce it, region in northern Brazil where your obviously project's located?
Yeah. Well, as I said, the Tapajos, which most people never even heard of, is the site of the world's largest gold rush in history in terms of people that were washing gold during the rush. And it started in about 1978. And right there, and back then, the region was quite remote. Most of the access was through rivers and small aircraft. In fact, the world's busiest airport in the early 1980s wasn't Heathrow or Dallas or Atlanta. It was a small town called Itaituba, which was the center of the gold rush. It certainly wasn't the world's busiest in terms of people, but it was the world's busiest in terms of takeoffs and landings, and all those takeoffs and landings, over 1,000 a day, would have been small planes. Right. So since then, of course, the infrastructure's improved enormously. There are roads, paved roads going through the area now. Access is much, much better than it was 30, 40 years ago. So I've been captivated for quite a long time, I guess probably going on 15 years now, about back in the gold rush days, these guys were mining gold from the streams. So they were washing gold, as like you've seen it on TV. Some of the old documentaries and stuff, the old photographs, watching guys with wooden sluice boxes, washing gold from the streams. Now, all that gold that was produced back then, and over about a 15-year period during the gold rush, which was mainly the 1980s, and basically petered out in 1995, there were an estimated 20 to 30 million ounces of gold washed from the streams.
Right.
That is an enormous amount of gold. It ranks in terms of, if you look at districts, placer gold districts throughout the world, that actually ranks number 3 in terms of the gold that was produced. So it's number 1 in terms of the people that rushed up there, but it's number 3 in terms of the gold that was produced. So that gold, that placer gold, is all gold that's been eroded from the surrounded rocks. So I've been on a bit of a personal quest for the last sort of 15 years or so to try and determine, or try and figure out, where this gold was coming from. There are obviously multiple sources. I mentioned there were 100 different places where they were washing gold from. And so a friend of mine basically mentioned this to me 15 years ago. And well, I said, well, where would you start with this? He said, well, these areas have all been abandoned, or mostly abandoned now. As the gold in the gravel was exhausted, people moved on. And when the gold rush actually petered out completely, most of those folks went back to what they were doing previously, farm laborers, bus drivers, et cetera, et cetera. And so most of these areas were abandoned. So this friend of mine, who's a geologist, started talking about it. And I said, well, where would you start? And he said, well, it looks like a lot of these areas are free for staking. So, and we went into an area first off where we were fortunate enough to see that at the base of the stream, we could see the rocks exposed. Very, very unusual. Most of these areas are just water-filled pits and covered with vegetation, and vegetation's all grown back and covered everything. In this one area, we could see that were some veins exposed at the base of the pit, where the miners had been mining the gold from the gravel. And we took some samples, and they came back very good grade. We could see that it was quite a wide zone. That recognition basically led to us making a discovery called of a deposit called Tocantinzinho. Now that is now owned by Eldorado Gold, and it's about 2.5 million ounces, Rob. It's fully permitted, and so we had some early success. So this friend of mine said, look, there are 20 other areas here that we
Right.
can actually stake that could have, that nobody knows where the gold was actually coming from, and let's grab them. So here we are, fast forward 15 years later. I think we've now been involved directly. I've been directly involved with 4 gold discoveries in Brazil, in this part of the world. And if you take the whole management team at Cabral, we've been involved with 5 in the region. But as I said, the key asset that we've got inside of Cuiu Cuiu is called, inside of Cabral, it's called Cuiu Cuiu, and was the richest one. So we think,
So you've taken the best one.
there's a very good likelihood that there could be a very large gold deposit associated with this. And we're not starting from nothing. We're starting with 1 million ounces. So that number's going to go up. It's definitely going to get a lot larger.
Yeah. What sort of challenges would you say you've had working in Brazil compared to probably other areas that you've worked in or other jurisdictions? Is there any particular unique challenges that you've had in Brazil where you probably haven't had before?
I wouldn't say that unique challenges. I've come across similar challenges before. I'd say the biggest challenge probably for us as a small company, which is not Brazil specific necessarily, Rob, but it's raising capital. Because we are a small company and we're exploring, we're like a research and development company. So, in the equivalent of the pharmaceutical industry, we would be looking for the next blockbuster drug. In the mining industry, we're looking for a very big gold deposit. And we've already got a modest sized gold deposit, but we think it's going to get larger. But apart from that, I think that the main challenge for us in this area is the fact that 99.98 or 99% of the area is covered by soil and vegetation. So that means we've got to get as smart as we can about looking through that cover to determine where the gold is coming from. That's probably, I would say, the biggest challenge of working in the area that we're working now. There's lots of tools that we can bring to bear on this. And we've obviously had some success because we already have a 1 million ounce gold deposit and 8 other target areas where we've drilled gold. Yeah, I'd say that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. And how's the relationships between the government and local community? How are they? And how are they receiving you guys being there?
Yeah, excellent question. We're in a state called Pará. It's a very big state in northern Brazil. It has a number of very large iron ore and aluminum mines within the state. It has some significant gold and copper mines as well. So the state is not wholly dependent on mining, but mining is a major component of the state's revenues. And so the state government is very supportive of mining activity. The other thing I would say about where we are is there is we take our relationship with the local community very seriously. So there's a small village where we are that was basically established during the gold rush when there were probably more than 10,000 people living there. There's now about 300 people living in the village. We do as much as we can to help the community. I'll give you some examples. There's some stuff on our website, cabralgold.com, but I'll give you some examples of what we do. We sole fund a health post. It is the only health post in the village, and it's obviously been very, very important for the community, particularly now. We do everything up to minor operations, so fix broken bones, sew people up, give people medicine for various things. So we fund that. We sole fund that. We have a nurse that works part-time on that for the community, and we don't charge anybody anything. We've just drilled a new water borehole, so the community now has a fresh source of drinking water. And obviously we sole funded that. We're now putting all the pipes in. We pick up all the rubbish in the village twice a week. We have a track. We provided everybody with bins. We have just renovated the school, and the community is in the process of building a new school, which we're part funding. But we put air conditioning into the old school, fixed the roof up. I took down a bunch of old laptop computers and a projector and a few things last time I went down. And so we do as much as we can, Rob. Obviously, what we can do is limited by the fact that we're an exploration company. So as yet, we don't have any revenues. But we have a good relationship with the local community.
Yeah. And have you helped out with the coronavirus in terms of maybe testing or anything that's obviously more recently?
Absolutely, because we self-fund the only health post in the community. So, we've paid for and brought in a lot of test kits. We've just hired an additional nurse to help our guy that is there. He was kind of a little bit overwhelmed. Fortunately, the infection rate in where we are has dropped off significantly now, but we hired a secondary nurse, all at our expense. And so, the community, obviously we're not charging people for any of that. So, yes, we've helped out as much as we can.
No, that's good to hear, and I'm sure the audience appreciate that as well. What do you see in sort of terms of news flow and potential catalysts over the sort of short-term period over the next 6 months?
Yeah, good question, Rob. We've just, well, let me step back. In April, we announced a $2 million financing. We have since expanded that. I was quite surprised by the level of interest in that financing, particularly since it was there was no warrant attached to the offering. And so we've expanded that to about $4 million. We've closed a couple of weeks ago on about 3.2, and we hope to close on the remainder in the next couple of weeks. Now, that money will allow us to do an awful lot of drilling. We've recently acquired a reverse circulation drill rig, and we looked at buying a new rig and importing it into Brazil from the US last year, but the cost was prohibitively expensive. We've just found the used rig, identical model to the one that we want, and we bought it for a fraction of what it would be new. So we bought it for about 7% of what it would cost us new. So there's a few parts that need to be replaced. So that rig is going to allow us to drill an awful lot of meters this coming year, starting probably in about August. And so there will be a lot of news flow, and that rig will first test these new targets that I mentioned where there's no drilling been done. So Alonso, the one that's where the surface samples are averaging about 3 ounces a ton, we'll start with that one. It'll be tremendously exciting. I won't be sleeping whilst that rig's turning at Alonso. I just won't. We're very excited. It's got the highest grade gold values of the 20 plus targets that we've got, at least on surface. It will then move to another new target that we announced recently in April called Medusa, where the surface samples are averaging about 26 grams a ton, which is also very high grade.
Yeah.
There's another area called Silmar where we've got some cracking targets where there's, which is shedding a lot of very coarse grain nuggets. And so I suspect that we will have tested or we will be testing those 3 initial targets within the first 4 to 6 weeks. So with every target we test, of course, there's a possibility of just making a new gold discovery, discovering a new gold deposit. Yeah. The rig will then move to some other targets that we're looking at right now, some of which have had some drilling. I mentioned there were 8 other areas outside the million ounces that we've got, where we've got some fantastic drill results. And I'll give you some examples. Last year, we drilled a new area called Machichi, and one of the holes at Machichi was only drilled half a dozen holes, but one of them cut 3.4 meters at 36.9 grams. That is a stunning kind of result. Yeah. We have other areas where that were drilled some time ago, where we have, to give you an example, we have an area that's only 500 meters away from one of the existing deposits that's got a drill hole 27 meters at 6.9 grams. Not as high grade, but a nice, wide, thick section. We have another area, 39 meters at 5.1 grams. I mean, I could go on. Take a look at the website, particularly the presentation deck, because there is an awful lot of high-grade mineralization on this project. It's really a district, Rob. I mean, we refer to it as a project, but I think more correctly, you'd have to say it's a district there. And what I mean by that is there is excellent potential here to discover multiple gold deposits. The million ounces that we have right now is spread between 2 deposits, which are both open at depth, and there's no doubt that they will grow significantly. But as I said, there's an awful lot of other targets beyond those.
So it's just a fraction of what potentially is there, and what you're looking, I suppose, to go after.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. The project, or the district, the area that we have claimed, is 360 square kilometers. And I fully expect, you asked me earlier about news flow, and as I said, there'll be a lot of drill news over the next 6 to 9 months. But in parallel with that, we're going to be doing continuing the regional exploration program, the surface exploration program. And there are probably a dozen different areas within the project area where we know that the streams produced a lot of gold, and we don't know where that gold was coming from.
Yeah.
So I fully expect that we'll be generating additional new targets as the drilling progresses. So
yeah,
it's exciting times for us.
Yeah. And have you got sort of timeframes in terms of sort of drilling programs and exploration programs before you sort of move forward? And also, as a company, do you have an exit strategy, or are you then looking to sort of move into construction and production?
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about timeframes, and then we can talk about strategy. So timeframes, as I said, we want to start drilling in August, maybe late July, maybe later this month if we're lucky, but more likely to be at the first week of August. And we will be drilling throughout the rest of the year, and probably into early next year. Now, we haven't fully nailed down what the program's going to be yet. We're currently discussing that. We'd like to get the second tranche of the financing closed before fully committing, but I fully expect to have rigs turning in early August. In terms of the strategy for this company, the strategy of this company, Rob, is to define an economic gold deposit. And I think the opportunity from an investment perspective here is the fact that we have a market cap of 15 million Canadian. We already have a resource of 1 million ounces, and we'll have $4 million in cash. So subtract the cash out of the equation. That means that the market's valuing our gold deposit at $11 Canadian an ounce. So you convert that to US dollars, which we're more familiar with. Enterprise value on this company is probably about $7 or $8 US per ounce in the ground. Well, you set that against current gold price, which is about $1,760 an ounce. I think there's enormous opportunity. Now, as we know, the market goes in cycles. And the last time there was a cycle that looked like this, and we are at the beginning of a cycle here, clearly we are, was 10 years ago, basically. Just back then, as we're seeing again this time, even though the drivers are somewhat different this time, the cycle is similar in that what happens first is you get a big run up in the gold price, and that's still ongoing, obviously. There are a lot of folks in the industry who think the gold price is going to go to $5,000, $10,000 an ounce.
Yeah.
It may not, but obviously it's still on the way up. And then you get a move into the major gold mining companies, big companies like Barrick, Yamana, Kinross, Anglo Gold, Ashanti, right? You've seen all those share prices go up.
Yeah.
Then there's this cascade down into the mid-tier producers, the smaller companies that have smaller mines, and they've started to move significantly this year. And then finally, you get small companies like us, the tinier explorers and developers. And when the explorers and developers move, and they're starting to move, and it's always at the end of that cascade in value, a lot of these companies are going to go up 5, 10, 15, 20 times.
Yeah.
So it's a massive opportunity right now.
Yeah. And where do you see the sort of gold price over the short to medium term from your perspective?
I think it's going to continue to go up. Rob, as I said, the pattern that's emerging here is very similar to what happened 10 years ago, albeit the driver's somewhat different. And particularly now that we're in this COVID-19 situation, that has meant that many governments around the world have needed to print money, essentially. And that obviously ultimately is going to decrease the actual value of that money. So there will be a move in, and there already is a move into commodities. And, typically when these sorts of things happen, people move into gold. So all this money that's been injected, for example, where you are in the UK, the government's announced some huge aid packages to various, to business, various business sectors. That's ultimately going to mean that the currency is worth less, not worthless, but worth less than it was, 12 months ago.
Yeah, and everyone's purchasing power decreases as well, so you don't get more for your money. You get less for your money.
That's right. And so obviously there are other drivers that come into it too, but I would say that's the key driver here, in my personal opinion. But and so I think that represents an enormous opportunity. And I think you're seeing it with smaller companies like ours that are able to get finance much easier. For the last sort of 7 or 8 years, very difficult to finance a small little company like ours. Yeah. Very, very difficult, right? People here in Canada are more interested in investing in cryptocurrencies and the cannabis space and other things. But I think the fact that we were able to do a financing that had no warrant on it, typically people here in Canada, people typically who invest in companies like ours are looking for a warrant. So they buy a unit, they buy a share, typically a discount, and then they have the option to buy another share at some point in the future for a period of 2 or 3 years, typically. Yeah. We didn't need to offer that warrant here, and we still had an enormous number of orders. So I think that, for me, is a real leading indicator. It's never easy to raise money when you've got no revenues, but it certainly has been. There's been a lot more interest coming into our sector and our part of the mining sector, particularly in the last 6 months.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I've been sort of studying a lot of economics just more recently, and I think it's mining's time now, and especially gold. So I expect that it will be easier, or getting easier, to raise money, and there being more money available to the gold market, and also obviously the mining industry.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of leading indicators that I'm very sensitive to, and I'll give you another example. There are a number of new funds that were unknown 12 months ago, where different investment groups and people that manage money are setting up dedicated mining funds to invest in the gold space, and so that is great. But a number of these groups are now establishing funds to invest in the junior sector, right? The small sector, the more, I suppose you'd have to say, higher risk, earlier stage companies like ours, rather than the big producers, because there is that potential to make 10 times your initial investment. People who invest in junior companies like ours are typically looking to make 5-10 times the money, as opposed to, if you buy Barrick, you may make 30%, you may make 50%, you may even double your money. But I think that's also a very good leading indicator of where we're heading here in the short to medium term.
Yeah, and I think the mining space, especially the gold space, is undervalued compared to other assets. So I think that there will be a lot more money available to the industry, and especially gold.
I mean, as I said, the value proposition in our particular case, and we're not alone. There are lots of other companies with a similar sort of value proposition, but in our particular case, we already have 1 million ounce gold deposit drilled off, and that is currently valued at about $7 an ounce. Yeah. So, the gold price typically moves more than that, sometimes several times more than that. So, I think there's enormous opportunity.
Yeah, certainly. I've got a couple more questions. So, why should someone invest in Cabral Gold?
Well, I invest in this space, and so I have my checklist of things that I look for. I think one important thing that we haven't discussed is that I'm the largest shareholder. So I've put an awful lot of my money into this company. So it's about 1.7 million Canadian, more or less. And I'm not a particularly wealthy guy. I live in a rented 2-bedroom apartment here in Vancouver. So I'm the largest shareholder. So I'm aligned with my shareholders. We've got some very good other shareholders, which include the Royal Bank of Canada, their precious metals fund. There's a group called Dundee Goodman. It's very well known in Toronto. They're a very big shareholder. A gold fund called Phoenix, which has a good interest too. So it's a mix of institutional and retail investors, but management is heavily invested in this company, and owns, as a board and management, we own over 20% of this company. That's the first thing. Second thing I would say is the capital structure of this company has about 80 million shares out now. Once we close this second tranche, it will be close to 90 million shares. So the capital structure is reasonable. We're in a jurisdiction, as I said, where there are multiple large gold mining companies active in Brazil, and it has a very dynamic and growing mining sector with a very deep pool of skilled workforce. The other thing I'd say, Rob, is that, and I've said this 2 or 3 times already, we already have a 1 million ounce gold deposit. So this isn't a tiny company that's got this idea to go look for gold in a part of Brazil. We already have 1 million ounces. And as I said, that those deposits are open at depth. The other thing I look for as an investor in junior mining companies, I look for upside. Now, the upside on the project that we have, or the district that we have, is truly stunning. I cannot recall, and I've looked at hundreds of gold projects, another gold project that I've come across in my career that has the sort of upside that this company does. Because we have 8 other target areas where we've already drilled gold and got some very good high-grade intercepts in 8 areas outside the 1 million ounces, which, as I said, is going to grow. So there are 8 targets with some drilling. And then we've got a whole series of other targets, some of which we've already discussed, where we've got very, very good numbers on surface that have no drill holes as yet. And so the other thing I would say is that we're right next door. The claims are contiguous with the project I mentioned earlier called Tocantinzinho. That is owned by Eldorado Gold. So we have a major gold mining company right next door to us. And by the way, their project area produced 200,000 ounces of gold. Our project area produced 2 million ounces of gold during the gold rush. So, we're optimistic that our project could be a lot larger than that, than theirs. The other thing I'd finally say, what again we've alluded to, is that there's an awful lot of news flow going to be happening in terms of this company. So, there's a lot of drilling that we're planning on August, and every couple of weeks or so, we'll be drilling a new target. Well, that's going to be pretty exciting. We're not telling investors that we're planning a drill program to drill one target. We're going to be drilling a whole series of those, and with each target, we could make a new discovery. So I don't think I'm going to get much sleep for the next 6 to 9 months, to be perfectly honest. No, I would say that's probably, those are the reasons in a nutshell. And finally, the enterprise value on this company right now is equal to about $7 to $8 an ounce in the ground, which is kind of a crazy kind of valuation. But such has been the cycle that we've been in, and most of these junior companies, as I said earlier, have not actually caught fire yet, but they will. It's coming. Yeah, certainly. I mean, it definitely sounds an attractive proposition, and I can see your enthusiasm in the project. And obviously we've got a lot of people listening to these episodes, so I'm sure they'll definitely look into the company. I just want to ask one last question. What does mining mean to you? Well, mining to me, that's a very good question. Mining means to me, it's the basis of our societies. So if you look around your room, or if you look around your street or your town, let's say you stand outside your house and start looking around, probably 95% of, or maybe more, of what you're looking at is mined or grown. And most of it will be mined. So your roads, for example, your houses, if you're built in brick, your car, your computer, your cell phone, your fridge, your cooker, everything that you depend on, and I depend on, and we depend on as a society, is basically mined. Just about everything. Obviously food is a different thing, but it has a massive, massive impact. Now, so I think if mining is done responsibly, it has and will continue to have a tremendous benefit to society in general. And as technologies advance, we depend on commodities to power those technologies. And so being a tiny, tiny part of that and having the ability to potentially discover something what could be a massive benefit to the local community and transform people's lives is an incredible opportunity. And so, where I'd like to be in 5 years' time is with a much, much larger gold discovery, probably in 2 years' time, with a much, much larger gold discovery, so that we can start discussing the development of that project, and having, making lasting, meaningful benefit for the people in the region. I think that's what it means to me.
Yeah.
Long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, it does, and you're correct in everything you said. It's funny, since I've been doing these podcasts, that whole theory of, or not theory, that everything around us has either been mined or agriculture, generally always does come up. And I think people outside of the mining industry don't actually realise that.
No. I think the industry as a whole has done an atrocious job of marketing. Basically, they've basically assumed that everybody understands that. Well, most people don't.
No, they don't.
My daughter's 19. She picks up a cell phone multiple times a day. It has probably never given any thought to what's inside the phone and where it comes from.
Just comes from a factory.
That's right. It comes from a factory. Well, all these factories, electric cars, wind turbines, et cetera, solar panels. What do you think they're made out of?
Yeah.
All made out of things that we need to extract and produce. But we need to do a much better job as an industry in terms of marketing ourselves and explaining to people just how important what we do is.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's another episode around sort of branding and marketing, the whole industry. And again, that sort of topic always comes up regularly when I interview guests around branding, and everyone has the same sort of thinking that the branding and marketing of the mining industry isn't great, and it can be improved so much. So the actual whole world understands what mining, fundamentals of mining is. Because I think majority don't actually understand.
Yeah, we somehow need to get much better at it as an industry. Much better. There's a massive amount of room for improvement for doing that, because you get one terrible tragedy, such as a dam collapse or something. There was something in the news today about an informal mine in Myanmar, I think it was, but a jade mine where a wall collapsed. Terrible tragedy. And that. People look at that and they say, well, that's symptomatic of the mining industry, which it's not. So I think we can do a much better job. We need to do a much better job.
Yeah, certainly. All right, Alan, really appreciate your time in taking the time to do this podcast. If our audience wants to sort of reach out to you, ask you any questions, find out more about what you're doing, how can they go about doing that?
Well, they can go to our website, which is cabralgold.com, cabralgold.com, or they can email me directly, Alan, ALAN, at cabralgold.com.
Yep. And are you on any other social media platforms?
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn. We're on, I think we have a Facebook page as well. We're on Twitter. We're on all the major platforms. So you can find us there.
Yeah, certainly. We can put those in the show notes as well. So really appreciate your time, Alan. Thank you very much for giving us the account of Cabral Gold and giving the audience an understanding of mining in Brazil. And I'm sure a lot of the audience would be very interested, and will reach out to you. So I really appreciate your time.
Real pleasure, Rob. Thanks for your time.
No worries. And until next time, happy mining.